but let's make this pretty casual. As you might be able to tell, I'm sitting in the museum's library and surrounded by books, which is always great fun. So I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and waters, the Bamal and Badu that we're on tonight, for us gathered here, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Now, Shaped by the Sea, I've got a bit of an overview about this major change for the museum in terms of a slideshow. Hopefully I can work out how to share that. But I thought I'd start off with a bit of an anecdote, perhaps a bit of a story. Shaped by the Sea is the thesis of the exhibition that the museum is building at the moment, which is replacing the permanent galleries, what we call the permanent galleries. Now these have been pretty much intact for 30 odd years, and they're old narratives, and we're trying to reshape the way that the museum tells its ongoing permanent and free galleries, the core of our exhibition spaces in the museum. And Shaped by the Sea is our thesis that we're all shaped in some way by the sea. And when I think about this, I'm from Blacktown in Western Sydney. And I think back and think, how was I shaped by the sea? You know, Blacktown, back when I was a kid, was a fair way from the sea. We had a place called Blacktown Beach, which was more like a bit of a sewer outlet than a beach. But we did want to go surfing, and we took our surfboards on the train from Blacktown to Cronulla. And even though we mightn't have been able to get into the surf because the Cronulla boys wouldn't let us, and we were from Western Sydney, we still had this strong desire to be at the ocean. But the other thing about Blacktown for me, when I think about being shaped by the sea, is probably more important in many ways, is that you may or may not know that Blacktown was originally named the Blackstown because it was set up as an institute for Aboriginal people in the 1820s. And so that the people that settled around there, they named it the Blackstown, and that's how that place, the name originated. But growing up in Blacktown, I hadn't really thought about how the people that inhabited that space would have had a relationship to the sea. And they would have had a relationship that, if you think about the Cumberland Plain as a great big geological formation, a river delta millions of years ago, formed by sediment of sandstone and building up over tens of thousands of years. And then, you know, I'm not sure exactly when, but 30, 40,000 years ago, that riverbed starts to be cut into what we know as the Parramatta River and all the other creeks and valleys that enter into Sydney Harbour and the ocean. And the people who originally lived in Blacktown, the Aboriginal people, they would have oral histories and memories told down over generations of that river valley being flooded by inundation after the last ice age. So when you think about being shaped by the sea in Western Sydney, it's I guess what I'm talking about really relates to our thesis that there's many ways when we think about deep history, deep time history, that we are actually affected by being shaped by the sea, or maybe not just the seas, but the seas and the rivers and the waterways. Really, effectively, that's what Shaped by the Sea is about. So I guess what we're trying to do with this new gallery is two things: is show that, in my mind, as one of the co-curators, and I'll get onto that too. But in my mind, it's really important that we talk about maritime history, Australia's maritime history, not just about boats post 1788, but about the histories of the first peoples and tens of thousands of years of human history, and not divide our history from prehistory into written history. We know, we see in, for example, one example, we see in rock art, engravings of, the First Fleet or early colonial ships. And we see Aboriginal history making going on there. So this exhibition is about really, we're trying to challenge that idea that history has this divide between modern history and ancient history, between history and prehistory, between written history and oral history. And we're trying to challenge that the way that this exhibition is set up. And part of that, as I said, as being a co-curator, has meant that this was initially conceived with myself and Bo James, who was head of Indigenous programs here at the museum until last year. We worked on this together, and now Bo has been replaced by Matt Pohl, who's continued to work on this exhibition in a co-curatorial manner. And that co-curation is because we see this exhibition, these gallery spaces as dual perspectives of knowledge, dual perspectives of science as well. Now, if I share my screen, there we go. So Shaped by the Sea. The story, or perhaps it's better expressed as stories of deep time Australia. We're looking at the gallery here, the gallery space, which was once called the USA Gallery, and it was about Australia's relationship with the United States. That's been transformed now, and you come from the foyer of the museum and you come to the first section. And I should say here that Shaped by the Sea is an element of the development of the new narratives. So in this space, we're looking at deep time in terms of deep geological time and deep human time as well. The next gallery will be, we're still developing the concepts, but the idea is that following this, we'll have another gallery that talks about the encounters between Europeans and First Nations Australians and around the Pacific. And then the final gallery will be kind of like the last 200 or so years, focusing, I think, a great deal on Australia's migration history. And if any of you know the space, that would probably be developed in what's called the tall gallery, the big gallery. In some ways, this first gallery space is deep, dark, and underground, and the next, it's kind of like almost diving into maritime archaeology in a way. The next space will be kind of like the beach where these encounters occurred, and the final space will be hopefully reflect some kind of waves of colonization and migration in the narrative. I guess when I mention narrative too, that previously the exhibition spaces in the Maritime Museum were designed thematically. So we had commerce, shipping and trade, sport and leisure. This is a new way of developing a thematic and a chronological story. So it's broadly chronological. We start in deep time and we end up in the present, and with potentially nudges towards the future, particularly environmental histories. But inside that, there are many different journeys and paths you can take, and you can go back and forth a bit, and there are themes that can be explored within that chronology. This slide gives you a sense of when we were developing ideas for the gallery. We wanted to have an immersive experience. We want it to be a powerful and an important part of the museum's exhibitions. And so in developing, that really started quite a few years ago. In 2014, we started looking at the master narratives of the museum and trying to work out what the stories are. And we did a lot of research and workshops with various people, with experts, with visitors. And this really honed in these ideas about being shaped by the sea, and the need for Indigenous voices to be present and central to the story was a key thing as well. So as I said, we wanted this to partly tell a chronological story, but to also understand that in First Nations understandings, there's a real thread about time being cyclical, and I'll get back to that in a minute. So our concept takes inspiration from the idea of the sea as a living entity that underpins the relationship between Australia and its people, shifting, connecting, and carrying stories and knowledge through time into the present. And that gives us an idea of flow. Eddy and flow were two, excuse me, important concepts in developing the way the visitor experiences this gallery, and many of the stories and objects that came into place. Many journeys, one story. As I said, time is linear, but it's also cyclical. And Australia's story is a human story. We want to tell that human story from tens of thousands of years, seamlessly, alongside deep time history. And maybe it's a point to make here that this idea about deep time that seems to be re-emerging was in different ways. And I think the museum is part of this evolution of understanding what deep time might mean. But I think deep time was first mentioned by geologists back in the 1700s, who were trying to understand rock formations that looked to be millions of years old, tens of thousands of years old, not as in the 16th, 17th century, well, as in the early 18th century, was commonly accepted as the creation story of 6,000 years old or whatever it is. So geology was struggling with how to define these ancient periods, and that's where the concept deep time was first given for this period, pre-human period of time. It wasn't really, then it was really structured into different epochs that you probably know. But then more recently, in the last, I think, 50 years or so, people have been looking at deep time as a way to think about our relationship with the pre-written past, when you're talking about living alongside a culture that has had a continuous history that has been beyond European history and well beyond the history of writing itself. And so that's where we started to think about formation, presence, and knowledge as being key elements to the exhibition. Again, starting to map out that space, and we're starting to think about objects, and we're looking at really ancient objects, and from the museum's collection. That's another important element. We wanted to bring out some of the great objects that we have in our collection that have not been on display, that we've been collecting over the last 30 odd years. So we're looking here. one of the objects, which I hope is going to be a fantastic display. We have thousands of fossilized shark teeth, and they're currently being installed in what might be more of an art display than a history display. But, you know, they're between 2 and 30 or 40 million years old, these teeth. And this slide gives you a bit of the idea of the use of space and light and the vistas that we wanted people to immerse themselves in, and to circulate through. So this is giving you a bit of an insight into the mind of us over the last couple of years, trying to work out how to create this exhibition. What we came down to was, in the end, was three key elements: land, sky, and water, as part of the story of being shaped by the sea, that circle around in kind of eddies and flows a centerpiece called the everywhen. And some of you may know that that was a term coined by an anthropologist to understand, to try and comprehend indigenous knowledge. So that's how the exhibition physically itself is starting to reflect these areas and elements. And again, some ideas about the look and the design and the feel emerging. And here we go to the everywhen, or the centerpiece, where we've commissioned the Mulka project from Arnhem Land, and they've made a digital art installation called Danan Dukar. And this means many pathways or multiple ways to go. And it's going to be a fabulous centerpiece to the exhibition, that really encapsulates. They really have developed new understandings of land, water, and sky in a swirling 20-minute digital art installation. So I think that's going to be incredible. Now to some of the objects. We have this bronze dugong by Alec Tapodi. Some of you may have seen that before, but some of the objects that haven't been on display, such as this turtle shell mask and this shield from northern Queensland as well. So at the same time, where these objects are being displayed alongside early Western cartographic understandings of the continent, such as the one on the left, where people are trying to work out the shape of the edges of Australia, and the one on the right, where people are trying to understand the deep under ocean geological formations and where Australia might fit in all that. And so when I'm talking about having this dual perspectives of science and knowledge, sometimes these cross over, and sometimes they're juxtaposed side by side, I suppose. And we have some navigational instruments on display, such as this sextant, 19th century sextant, and these incredible steamboat river maps from the late 19th century, where they're incredibly long, meters long scrolls, where steamboat captains on the Murrumbidgee, Murray, Darling systems would make their own maps into a scroll and roll it out as they were navigating along the rivers. No use for any other kind of mapping, but the scroll was useful. And it also kind of reminds me of indigenous ways of mapping place. And we'll see that in one of the possum skin cloaks that will be on display as well. I don't have an image of that. And another kind of crossover moment of science is about this display on navigation. So here we have three what are called Ilma from the Bardi people in northwestern Australia, and they we have a large collection of these Ilma, and they are just fabulous objects. and we'll have I think about 12 on display. And they're they tell individual stories, but they can be part of a longer story from the Bardi people and the different groups around the Kimberley region. And this one in particular is part of a story about how someone navigated when their canoe took them out into the ocean, how they navigated back home safely. So alongside that, we have the kind of recent, this is a CubeSat, which has been put up by Sydney University as a satellite that's part of navigational modern navigational GPS systems. And we have some other objects from the collection. And this is an electric current meter, because one of the themes we talk about is, one theme is ocean resources, another theme is submerged forces. And we talk about how, undersea forces actually shape the formation of the continent. And here's one of the first objects that you will meet in the exhibition. And they're about 280 million years old. So these are crinoids, or sea lilies. And this is from Geoscience Australia, who've been really valuable in assisting us with the exhibition. And this is a coral core sample from Hummocky Island in Queensland, which is a Great Barrier Reef. And this is part of a story about a fascinating point of two different knowledges combining, two different knowledge systems or memories as well, combining, where these coral core samples were taken from corals in the Great Barrier Reef to understand the layers, and you can just see them faintly in there. The different layers tell us information over time, slow growing coral, about sea level rise or fall, and also about what's coming in from the rivers and what might be happening in the wider environment. But that sea level rise story scientists have only recently understood by taking these coral core samples is actually told in a tens of thousands of years, 8 to 10,000 year old story from the Yidinji people in northern Queensland, who have a continuously told story about sea level rise on their country, where their ancestors were forced to flee the rising seas. So I think, and I think there's, we talk about one or two of these, but these kind of parallel stories about sea level rise, I think there's been 21 around the country now so far identified from different First Nations groups. So that is my brief introduction to Shaped by the Sea.